I began working for an artist named Kristen Lucas, who taught video at Bard College, and she created an app. She was working on a project with flamingos, and it was about raising awareness for flamingo wetland conservation. And the app took the form of an augmented reality experience. And so my task was trying to figure out an algorithm or think about simulating actual birds in the wild using some kind of algorithm. And so I found Boyd's and flocking algorithms that kind of worked for moving these birds around the space. And so I'll show you that project at some point. But because I'm a musician, and I kind of thought about how can I apply that kind of flocking behavior to sound and to the FFT, to frequency domain FFT bins, because I was working a lot in kind of like spectral music. And so I did that, and it's been a lot of fun. I think it sounds pretty cool. And I'll show you that, and we can get back to the web later.
You can refresh it.
Yeah, it should be enabled right now.
Oh, okay. And if no web is enabled, it's okay too. I could also go. Oh, there we go. No web, but we have web. So I'll show you that the Flamingos project, because I think it'll help set the tone. Maybe clear our brains from the long day that we've had already studying computer music. And so are most people coming from a computational background, engineering background, musical background, for the most part, would you say? I didn't think about.
I adopted 20 flamingos.
Would you actually maybe?
I thought, I'm never going to see these flamingos.
I think people could hear it.
It's hilarious. You know, it's like, buying a planet.
Yeah, it's fine. We don't have to.
Unfortunately, I have no person.
But essentially, this is kind of what the experience began.
To be very accessible
and
more like a sketch.
What you'll notice about birds or herds in the wild is they don't get too close to each other.
Nobody ever asked me that, but it's
they tend towards groups, maybe for protection or some kind of survival reflex. And then there's lots of other cool things that you can do in the loop.
And you can interact with
mirror displays.
To view information graphics.
Yeah.
In this project, we're trying to get.
So there's lots of other cool things you can do within the loop while the birds are deciding where they're going to move. That might also determine other things they might do, like when they open their wings or when they move their head from left to right. Right? And so those things can be applied to a compositional kind of framework as well. Right? We can make decisions when certain things happen. And so what that kind of, when I first started this, because I had already created that flocking algorithm in Unity for this augmented reality experience, I used that same program to send the position of the birds over to Max via OSC. But that was problematic for a number of reasons. One big one was speed, and it was also just kind of hard to balance two frameworks with each other. And so there was already kind of an implementation of voids in Max, and so I used that, right? So there is a popular, I'll kind of take you through some of that research here. So there is Daniel Schiffman's Nature of Code book, Some people familiar with that? It's a processing manual. Essentially, it's like a cookbook of processing sketches. And so there's a really nice kind of browser-based Boyd's simulation, right? And the Max algorithm that we're using is a translation of this and processing in Gen. And so they're, just kind of looking at these examples here, flocking, Boyd's, Federico, I forget his last name, he kind of translates that flocking algorithm over to Gen. So, yeah, I can share this with whoever is curious. You can find me after, and I can share this collection of links with you. So, what did I do? You just took a bunch of stuff off the internet. The tricky part was getting that to kind of position FFT bins in a multi-channel environment, and to kind of compromise between these two different timing environments. Right? We're thinking about frame rate, and we're also thinking about audio rate. We're also thinking about window size. So how do you kind of get all of those kinds of things to agree with each other? And so that's kind of where the tricky part was, and where I'll show you. I got interested in frequency domain stuff based on Jean-Francois Charles' spectral time freezing stuff. So, around 2010, I got this Computer Music Journal article, which kind of breaks down how to record frames of spectral content into jitter matrices, and how to interpolate between them and slow them down to kind of give you this framing or freezing effect. And so that was a kind of a good rudimentary or a good introduction to frequency domain. So that's a great read. And it's also it's max based, so there's a lot of specific examples how to translate FFT bin stuff into jitter matrices.
Sorry, can you briefly explain what you mean by flocking? What that means for you to you?
Yeah. So flocking is a series of it's a behavioral kind of trait that describes how herds or groups of organisms behave in the wild. And then around 1981, we saw the first kind of computational implementation of that behavior by Craig Reynolds. And so he identified a number of rules that groups of organisms or groups of things, birds, but they're not birds because they're in computers, so they're Boyds. Maybe he was from New York, I don't know. But he identified a number of rules that could simulate the behavior of things in the wild. And so, just kind of like on the macro level, the first time that we kind of see this it's used for computer graphics mostly, I should say, also. So anytime you're watching a Disney movie and you see a herd of buffalo running through the savannah, that is a flocking algorithm. And so
the part of it that makes each buffalo decide where to be.
Exactly.
Is the flocking algorithm.
Yes. And I kind of like this. There's a tendency also many times also when you're learning maps to kind of from a sound perspective, from an engineering perspective, to kind of ignore jitter, because that's visuals and that is not what I'm interested in. But this was kind of a testament to the value in learning and getting the bigger picture there, or also drawing from a number of other influences to kind of you can't just be focused on sound all the time. You have to read books that are interesting to you outside of music and sound, and that's what makes your practice unique and different and special. So yeah, essentially, what we're gonna take a deeper dive into the algorithm, and so, but essentially, these are the instructions that will tell each individual of this organization of things where to be and where to go, where you're headed at each frame. So this algorithm is computed every frame. Yeah, and just yell stuff out as it comes to you. Right. Yeah. So Jitter was also kind of an OpenGL, learning these kind of like visuals focused frameworks in Max. Really helps you kind of create these virtual environments that can then be used as a stage for computing the amplitudes of sound things, right? So if I put something here and that's a speaker, if these red blocks are speakers, and so I can arrange my speakers around a virtual environment, and I can put some other 3D thing, and I can calculate the distance between these two things, right? And I'm not coming from a math background. You'll look at my code and you'll think I'm an idiot, probably most of you, because I'm not an engineer. But Google, the great equalizer, has enabled me to, has given me this excellent education that I won't go there. So yeah, how do I find the distance between points? Many of you know that, and this is like, I brought this up at CINMAT in UC Berkeley, and someone said, oh, that's easy, you had to look that up? But I think that, and that's just, just someone in the crowd, But what I think is kind of empowering about this is that you don't have to have an engineering degree, or you don't have to have access in the way that is limited to you, or limited to many people based on various socioeconomic kind of class indifference. So you can have class difference, so you can have access to this knowledge without going to school, right? I think that's really cool. I didn't learn math. I had to Google it, and if I would have known that I could make cool computer music in math class, I would have paid attention. But that's another problem. They don't tell you the power of math when you're learning it. They just say, learn this equation. So yeah, you can look up flocking algorithms and Boyd stuff, and in any kind of like language you feel most comfortable that you're using, Python and processing and WebGL if you're interested in Tone.js or other JavaScript implementation, audio APIs.
Here's my implementation of the Boyd's algorithm now.
So this is just kind of like a standard algorithm that people are implementing, usually for visuals, usually for particle simulations and techno concerts and things like this. That's what people are using them mostly for. So yeah, back to this stuff. Let's play some sound through it and kind of give you a sense of what it sounds like. I'm just gonna play a sine sweep first. Turn off some of the stuff. So what we're seeing here is are people familiar with FFT? And right, it's everyone's favorite thing to explain in front of a group of people. It is kind of like analysis of a complex signal, and the sine tones that what does that mean? The sine tones that could be used to resynthesize that complex tone. and a measurement of how much power, which turns into a measurement of how much power are in these subdivisions of the audible frequency spectrum. We call these frequency bins. So in here you'll see that these kind of nodes, these bluish nodes, some are opaque and some are more transparent than others. That's a representation of how much power is of spectral content is inside that frequency bin right now. And so if I not blast your ears too much. I have a filter on it here. But if you just bear with me for 1 second, and it won't be for too much longer, I'm going to kind of open up this filter, and you'll kind of see that you get the upper frequencies, and those are kind of like more purpley or red. And so, as the way I look at this, the way I see this is as a tool for improvisation. So I have a background in kind of improvising in multi-channel sound environments. But what is not fun for me is kind of like having to think about making something sound dynamic and then also having to think about, the placement of this compositionally while I'm performing in real time. And so what this system kind of allows me to do is give me this kind of very human, very musical kind of movement throughout the speaker environment without having to control it by hand, right? So, the reason why I kind of like to have a little bit of delay on it so I can kind of have some movement in different frequency, in the frequency spectrum as I'm moving my And can you kind of hear that? Is it audible? So what I think is special about that, the kind of movement that you hear in the room, is that I'm actually not panning anything by hand. I'm just changing the frequency content of the sound that I'm putting into the system. It's a little like hard to place. It's not typically when you're intently listening to kind of multi-channel or spatial audio. There's this effect that something is moving around you, something is moving in a circle, or something between two speakers. I kind of in explaining this to people, something that kind of bubbles up, or is this idea of like unfolding. Or looking between. Let's do it. Great question. How do we assign bins to voids? Anybody? Just kidding.
One each. I mean, one-to-one mapping would be obvious, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you'll see a window size of I'm using 256 a bin size of 256. So and I have 256 individual voids here in this simulation. So there's a one-to-one, and these voids are numbered, right? So if I have roughly these voids or these bins are around 86 hertz a bin. And so if I slow this down a little bit, I'll zoom in. Oops. Zoom in. And if I slow this down a little bit, you know, these are numbered. So I'm gonna put some low frequency stuff in here.
So are neighboring bins more likely to be assigned to neighboring voids?
No, they're not.
So it's random.
This is something that, like, going forward, I would like to be able to do that and to kind of like be able to switch out different kind of patterns and behavior in them. We have some bidirectional feedback, which is nice, and I'll show you what that looks like. But no, it's kind of like an even dispersion of stuff.
Gotcha.
So you'll notice that, like, the voids are lighting up. I have a 12, I have a 13, I have a 3, 23, it's a little high, or, you know, out of 256. So these are all relatively low in the spectrum. And then as I sweep up, you know, if I were to open up that filter, we would see higher. The indices of these voids would be the higher indices of these voids would be lighting up, would be more bright. So how are we doing that? So I'll take you inside the PFFT object first. Okay.
Can I ask a question before you dig into the implementation? So as I understand it, you have basically two forms of panning going on. One is that you're doing a FFT, an inverse FFT resynthesis, so you're breaking the sound into 256 frequency bands, and you're putting each one in a different place.
Yes.
So even if you had no flocking algorithm, even if you just randomly picked a point on the 2D plane for each of your FFT bins, you would have, as you swept the frequency, you'd be panning the sound, because different frequency bins would be, the energy would be panning in and out of different frequency bins, and therefore would be panning in and out of different spatial positions.
No, the panning positions and the amplitude of, like, bin 1, say, for example, is null and 0 until I tell each of these 4 speakers how loud that bin should be in each of these 4 speakers. So the only panning algorithm, or the only panning that is happening right now, that I'm showing you right now, is occurring as a result of the positions of the flocking algorithm.
I was saying, forget the flocking algorithm, just choose a random position for each bin.
I'm not doing that.
Right. Hypothetically speaking,
Okay.
a dumbed down version of your algorithm
Yeah.
that had no flocking algorithm, just put each bin in a different location on the plane.
Yeah.
As you swept the frequency or change the filter or Portamento, whatever, you're gonna, if you look at the FFT of each successive bin, you're panning the energy
Absolutely.
among the bins, and you're gonna get this spatial effect that you're talking about,
Yeah.
where it's unfolding, where you're just in a thing that's complexly putting different parts of the sound in different parts of space.
Correct.
And you have a flocking algorithm, so each of those bins is also itself moving. So if the input were just a sine wave, and all the energy was in a single bin, we would just hear that void doing its thing, panning around with a flock.
Yeah, but I'm not doing the first thing.
Right. So you're doing both things together. Which leads to my question, which is, how much do the effects of these two things contribute to the overall effect that you're getting?
I think maybe I didn't explain something right when I started. So I'm putting a mono sound into this, right? This PFFT object.
Right.
And why don't we just take it from, ground zero and just build it as we go? Because I think maybe something is missing. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe you're missing something.
Hey, we all learn.
What's up?
We all learn.
We're all learning. Yeah. So, so I'm going to put, so right now, right, so I'm putting a mono signal, and you'll look at this, and you're a Max person, and you'll know right away. Let's look at it together.
Okay.
Okay, cool. And I would say that this came from that. So, of just kind of like choosing a random, of choosing a spread of where, I'm not even into it. Where is that? It's right here. It doesn't matter. There's like a kind of like, when I was first experimenting with panning FFT bins, I was having to set them individually using the pan4s object, just using that to kind of like send it to different outputs. And so I'm not doing that for this here. So what I'm doing is, all right, so let me take a step back. What I'm doing is I am writing into a buffer the positions of the speakers. So I'm turning them into samples in a buffer. Oops, sound sources, speaker positions. Right, so we have in the first channel we have the X positions, we have the Y positions. They're all at 0, so you don't see anything there, and then we have the Z positions for those speaker positions, for those speakers in a buffer. Okay, using peak tilde. That all happens right here in this poly, and we're kind of basically just dividing 360 degrees into how many speakers that we get, and then offsetting those speakers at 90-degree angles. And then there's this kind of cool thing that we can do that ends up being a nice musical kind of, it's a nice kind of musical control that you have over the system, is you can kind of shift the position of the speakers, you can shift the room using like this angle offset here. So that can be mapped and it's fun to play with. So we're peeking in the XYZ values of of those speakers into a buffer. Cool. And then the Boyd's, the Boyd's algorithm that we took from the internet is also writing into a buffer the Boyd position. So in this poly, we are looking at a matrix value that indicates where each Boyd should be in the XYZ space, and we are peaking that. If you all direct your attention towards the bottom of the patch, we're peaking those Boyd positions into another buffer. So we have, see this here, and so if I kind of like increase the speed of this, and we're all excited to see how we're doing it, but so now as I kind of increase the speed, we're getting more updates in our buffer that stores our Boyd positions. Okay, so inside of our PFFT, we have 4 outputs, and we are checking each bin index. We're finding out the amplitude and phase, but kind of like maybe with the special stuff in here is that we're saying bin index 0. Look at the sample value, that is the void, and then look at the sample value for a speaker, a single speaker. Okay? So this has a patcher argument here, and so this listener poly has a 1, 2, 3, 4, and that gives me the sample values for my speaker at that index. Okay, so then we have our math, our vector math that finds the distance between those two vectors, and we get a value that is the distance between that void is and where that speaker is, that we turn into an amplitude scalar. And we're doing that for each void, for each speaker. And that's it.
Makes sense?
Okay.
So if you set if you set the maximum speed to 0,
Yeah.
and put in a Portamento, you would get a spatial panning, unfolding, developing effect.
Yes,
Even
you
if the
would.
Boyd's algorithm wasn't moving anything around.
Correct. Let's hear it.
Effectively freezing it at some arbitrary, could have been random set of Boyd positions.
Could have, yes. What am I doing? What am I not doing? Nada. Oh yeah.
So it looks like the speed got turned on.
Oh yeah. Just closing max. Why are we so low?
Filter?
Filter.
What's the filter?
Thank you so much. Let's just patch it right in there. Oh, there we go. Yeah. Does anybody want to explore some or any part of that more in depth?
Just a question. So now it's just intensity that's met, right? So you're finding out how long the space is to all of those speakers, and then basically the volume is what's changing, not the time, right? There are no time delays coming from the software. I'm curious, have you experimented with like time delays as well? So if this sound source would be close to that speaker, and then that one would be delayed, the output, would that make more of a spatial impression or a different one?
It totally would. And this is a very kind of crude, approach to panning, right? We're just finding the amplitude of this bin across all these 4 speakers, and I'm not taking into consideration, early reflections or things like this that could, in filtering or ambisonics that could, add to this impression of real space. But for me, this is kind of like a compositional tool or an improvisational tool. Yeah, but this is something that, at this stage, I'm beginning to think about. And then another kind of like question I got a few days ago was, well, have you heard of SPAC? Have you heard of ICST tools? I have, and I've used those tools, and they're great, and I've used them for compositions and performances. There was, and you may or may not get the same satisfaction out of this, but there's a value to kind of like understanding your own system so that you can add these things in an incremental way that really allows you to kind of learn what's actually happening. And then to give you the musical control over that system that makes sense to you. And then SPAT doesn't work in Ableton. I think that's a question, but I don't think it does. And ICST tools, it's another job just getting those tools to work in an environment that you feel comfortable in musically. And then I like using Ableton because I don't have to write a delay line every time I want delay or a reverb.
Sure, that makes sense. Thanks.
I wonder if you, like, on the right side, a lot of stuff, when the sound sources are all in the center, it can sound more mono-fi. Like, are you able to spread those sounds towards the walls to
Yeah,
feel more?
let's do that.
Are they consciously avoiding the speakers? Seems like they tend to have like a cross pattern.
Mosh them.
They are not. Yeah, there is. It's.
They're tending not to go into those corners.
They are not. There's right. There's a goal position, and right now the goal position was the center. But if I can move those. And let me give a little bit of. So I have, more or less speaker 1. So it's also like a, this is a classic example in the Max examples folder for Bit and Planet, right? It's just that. And so what's kind of interesting, or really, it's almost you're just filtering the sound in each speaker, weirdly. There is a drop off in the center that I'm not accounting for. You'll notice that. And you can change the diameter which that roll off occurs here. So if I minimize that diameter, there's more of a drop off. And there's more of like a discrete. This system to the left accounts for that in different ways. This was just kind of like this is just monophonic sound sources, or these are assigned to grains. So if I record some sound into the buffer, I'm getting some popping. I'm sorry, I need to fix my patch. But I've said that there's going to be. This is a kind of Frankenstein version of this thing that I was working on before, called the triple perk. I got really clever with naming them at one point, but the triple perk is. You guys familiar with this? Well, there's a type of bong. It's a roar bong, and they have this triple percolator thing that, like, it filters the sound. It filters the pot smoke. And I think when I was making this, I was doing that, and I don't really anymore. But it has this kind of bubbly bong sound, and this was after like a reading of Microsound of Curtis Rhodes' book. So it gives you just kind of like so you can control each of these green sources corresponds to one of these sliders here, and there's groups of sliders. So if I wanted to make one of those sources grain longer, I can increase this and down to 25 milliseconds, these are arbitrary choices, to 200 milliseconds. I could increase or lower the probability that after it's playing one grain, one playback, that it will choose a new random position in this buffer. And so if I wanted to freeze things, I can do that, freeze the positions. And so now there's some movement, I can detune them and send them to individual delay lines. And pitch them up octaves. And so this is more of a traditional approach to panning stuff, right? Single point source panning.
So do you have a single source channel that you were putting through all 4 of these?
This was each individual grain comes from this buffer here that I recorded just a little bit of this into, yeah.
Have you experimented any with non-static goal positions?
No, but yeah, I kind of dream of these things and think of this and have this thing moving around and that a drunk walk or something like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's much more reminiscent of the first examples you showed of the flocking.
Yeah.
With soaring.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What about adding the elbow shift to the motion of the swarms themselves, the point sources?
Yeah, these.
John probably has. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, these are things that I'm kind of I'm familiar with.
That's actually the same thing as putting in the delay to each speaker from each source. If you implement that, then you'll get Doppler.
I'm gonna do
automatically because as you zoom towards the speaker, you'll be shortening the delay line.
Right.
That is exactly how you implement the Doppler effect. That's the same thing.
Yeah. There's translating that for each speaker. Yeah, there's.
So that leads to my question, which is how often do you compute the distances and the resulting amplitudes? Per sample in gen?
Per sample in gen, but those distances only update every frame, which happens 60 times a second.
Okay, because the flocking algorithm is only running at 60 hertz. Because it's timed through jitter?
Yes.
So are you interpolating in between?
No. The gen is just doing.
I would think you would hear the zipper noise.
I would, but you don't.
You are.
But it's going slow enough, I think.
Huh, that's interesting.
It also sounds a lot better than I thought it would. I thought that I might lose, something like in phase or, but there's kind of an accurate representation of the sound on the other end that surprised me.
I bet if you move the sources fast enough to get Doppler effects, these problems will surface.
Yeah, I imagine.
But you could do it pretty easily. In gen, each time you get a value, you just ramp to it over the 1/60th of a second.
Uh-huh.
Or use a one pole, some kind of, just any way of smoothing that data so, the step function input turns into something reasonable.
That's, yeah, I'll look into that. Can you teach me? Can I come in?
Sure.
Do you consider the visualization of voice to be part of the final artwork to be presented to the audience, or is it just sort of a debugging tool to help understand how things are moving around?
That's a great question. I think about that a lot, and I don't consider them part of the artistic output. I mean, code is art, and I consider this like an artistic kind of process in itself. But I don't imagine projecting the visuals. Yeah. I was thinking it, like in an installation form, maybe having some kind of screen or understanding what's happening, maybe. Yeah. But these are questions I'm thinking about too. But at the moment, no. I'm making recordings with it actually, which are just sound recordings.
Yeah, I was wondering if, I kind of feel like with a lot of these kind of dynamical system-based sonification models, I don't know if you maybe want to call it like that, but there's kind of a point of diminishing returns where, especially when you're treating things as point sources, you kind of lose, especially if your kind of intent is to move the shift sound around space, you kind of lose that capacity upon more and more like particles there. I wonder if you've tried to experiment with like kind of an optimal number of agents in the swarm so that you can kind of better recreate that kind of movement in space.
Yeah, that was actually something that, so I had increased, I was using 512 bins and you butt up against computational, it's more expensive and the simulation, I can tell that there's a hit in the frame rate. And then there's also a hit in the effectiveness of this idea of spatiality, and it sounds much more like a monophonic source coming out of all four speakers.
Sure.
And the 256 bin size was originally agreed upon because I was using an older laptop, and so I just, that was all I could do. And then when I got this, I was like, okay, I'm going to increase that, and I didn't like it. But you lose something too, also, and this is like so crystal clear, and when you run it through that, you lose something. You lose a lot.
Sure.
But I think because there's such pure tones coming out of here, I haven't played too much with like playing pop music through it, or a little with like drum recordings and field recordings. But you lose a lot in those more so than these more pure instruments.
Are there other FFT kind of mangling effects like this
Thank you.
that inspired this project, or have you found any other types of this kind of processing?
In my own kind of work, I was like, I was experimenting with encryption and thinking about making encrypted music. And so this was, based on this history of wartime encryption, and which led to the phase vocoder, and essentially what this did was scrambled the bins and stored this stored. I think I can show you. Yeah, I don't know if it'll work, but I am going to turn off my microphone. But essentially allowed you to scramble the frequency bins and store them in a text file where they went, and then record encrypted audio and descramble it on the other side. Input volume. Okay, cool. I can open this thing up. And so, am I going to attempt to do this? How much time do you have? Maybe 2 minutes?
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm going to save this text. I'm going to save a text file, Karma encrypt to my desktop. And Karma encrypt to my desktop looks like this. It's 512 values, which represent our frequency bins, and then the location that bin is hiding in the recorded audio. So bin 2 is actually going to be hiding in bin 64 and so forth. And this is akin to a monoalphabetic cipher, so one of the easiest to break, ciphers. So you just mix up the alphabet and you know where the alphabet's mixed up. Got it. And so what I might do is I'm going to now record some audio. Hello, this is a secret sound that no one can hear. And actually, yeah, that should work. And so if I play this back, live demo is going to be difficult. Let's see if actually anything came through in here. There's no audio there. I think maybe because this is open, we can close this. Oh, my microphone's already done.
I'd be down here. So you're not gonna come
Can't you mute your output too?
It's my microphone was down.
Oh, okay.
I brought you down on the board.
Okay. Hello, this is some secret audio. Test 2. You can scramble more and you find like the optimal kind of like hidden message, right? And so let's decrypt it. I like this idea of there's some graphics missing, as you can tell. I like this idea of having a pair of apps that work together. Load key. So I'm going to load my Karma encrypt text file. And I'm going to load my sound file.
Hello, this is some secret audio. Test 2. Hello, this is some secret.
I can't believe that worked. And there's some phase information lost there, so you have some kind of noisy artifacts in that, because I'm not encrypting the phase or thinking about that at all. I don't know how we arrived there, but oh yeah, FFT stuff. Yeah.
Do you do much manual spatial control in your project? It sounds like you're delegating that to your phone.
I'm delegating that, but this came from a project where I was this project with a cellist, where I was assigning them to positions, assigning the bins, and then. Yeah, usually there's some delegation, in like making paths for the sound. Yes, but this is, yeah, I'm giving up control to the system that I think, is a musical system. And then so, in the future, I want to look at, other organizing systems, like inspired by like, quantum kind of behavior, things like popping in and out, and then maybe slime mold, other natural kind of things. This is, just looking at slime mold simulations and other ways of organizing systems, self-organizing systems, which might be fun, or might, not sound like any different.
Cool. Tommy, have you written a paper on this, or is your software available?
No software available, no paper, but if anybody, I'm an open book, so if anybody wants to ask, I'm happy to share. Yeah, maybe one day.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? All right, well, thank you, Tommy.